Hello, squirrel listeners. We're on chapter 16 of our story, The Murder at the Vicarage. Let's hope Miss Marple shows up. Keep waiting on her. Okay, 16. As I went out, I ran into Haydock on the doorstep. He glanced sharply after Slack, who was just passing through the gate, and demanded, "Has he been questioning her?" "Yes. He's being civil, I hope." Civility, to my mind, is an art which Inspector Slack has never learned, but I presumed that according to his own lights, civil he had been, and anyway, I didn't want to upset Haydock any further. He was looking worried and upset as it was, and so I said he had been quite civil. Haydock nodded and passed on into the house, and I went on down the village street, where I soon caught up to the inspector. I fancy he was walking slowly on purpose. Much as he dislikes me, he is not the man to let dislike stand in the way of acquiring any useful information. "Do you know anything about the lady?" he asked me point blank. I said I knew nothing whatever. "She's never said anything about why she came to live here?" "No." "Yet you go and see her?" "It's one of my duties to call on my parishioners," I replied, evading to remark that I had been sent for. I suppose it is." He was silent for a minute or two, and then, unable to resist discussing his recent failure, he went on. "Fishy business, it looks to me." "You think so?" "If you ask me, I say blackmail. Seems funny when you think of what Colonel Prothero was always supposed to be, but there, you never can tell. He wouldn't be the first churchwarden who'd led a double life." Faint remembrances of Miss Marple's remarks on the same subject floated through my mind. "You really think that's likely?" "Well, if it's the facts, sir, why did a smart, well-dressed lady come down to this quiet little hole? Why did she go and see him at that funny time of day? Why did she avoid seeing Mrs. and Miss Prothero? Yes, it all hangs together. Awkward for her to admit. Blackmail's a punishable offense, but we'll get the truth out of her. For all we know, it may have a very important bearing on the case. If Colonel Prothero had some guilty secret in his life, something disgraceful, well, you could see for yourself what a field it opens up." "I suppose it did. I've been trying to get the butler to talk. He might have overheard some of the conversation between Colonel Prothero and Lestrange. Butlers do sometimes. But he swears he hasn't the least idea of what the conversation was about. By the way, he got the sack through it. The colonel went for him, being angry at his having let her in. The butler retorted by giving notice, as he didn't like the place anyway and had been thinking of leaving for some time." "Really? So that gives us another person who had a grudge against the colonel. You don't seriously suspect the man, what's his name, by the way?" "His name's Reeves. And I don't say I do suspect him. What I say is, you never know. I don't like that soapy, oily manner of his." "I wonder what Reeves would say of Inspector Slack's manner." "I'm going to question this chauffeur now." "Perhaps then," I said, "you'll give me a lift in your car? I want a short interview with Mrs. Prothero." "What about?" "The funeral arrangements." "Oh." Inspector Slack was slightly taken aback. "The inquest's tomorrow, Saturday." "Just so. The funeral will probably be arranged for Tuesday." Inspector Slack seemed to be a little ashamed of himself for his brusqueness. He held out an olive branch in the shape of an invitation to be present at the interview with the chauffeur, Manning. Manning was a nice lad, not more than 25 or 6 years of age. He was inclined to be awed by the inspector. "Now then, my lad," said Slack, "I want a little information from you." Yes, sir," stammered the chauffeur. "Certainly, sir." If he had committed to murder himself, he could not have been more alarmed. You took your master to the village yesterday." That's a question. "Yes, sir." "What time was that?" 5:30. "Mrs. Prothero went too?" "Yes, sir." "You went straight to the village?" "Yes, sir." "You didn't stop anywhere on the way?" "No, sir." "What did you do when you got there?" "The colonel got out and told me he wouldn't want the car again. He'd walk home. Mrs. Prothero had some shopping to do. The parcels were put in the car. Then she said that was all, and I drove home." I need to get some more glasses. "Leaving her in the village?" "Yes, sir." "What time was that?" 6:15, sir. 6:15 exactly." Where did you leave her?" "By the church, sir." Had the colonel mentioned at all where he was going?" "He said something about having to see the vet, something to do with one of the horses." "I see, and you drove straight back here?" "Yes, sir." "There are two entrances to Old Hall, to the Old Hall, by the South Lodge and the North Lodge. I take it that going to the village you would be going by the South Lodge?" "Yes, sir, always." "And you come back the same way?" "Yes, sir." I think that's all. Here's Mrs. Prothero. Let us, Miss Prothero. Let us drifted towards us. "I want the Fiat, Manning," she said. "Start her for me, will you?" "Very good, miss." He went towards the two-seater and lifted the bonnet. "Just a minute, Miss Prothero," said Slack. "It's necessary that I should have a record for everybody's movements of yesterday afternoon. No offense meant." Letta stared at him. "I never know the time of anything," she said. "I understand you went out soon after lunch yesterday." She nodded. Where to, please?" "To play tennis." "Who with?" "The Hartley. "At Much Benham?" "Yes." "And you returned?" "I don't know. I tell you, I never know these things." "You returned," I said, "about 7:30. "That's right," said Lettuce, "in the middle of the schmozzle." Anne having fits and Griselda supporting her. "Thank you, miss," said the inspector. "That's all I want to know." "How queer," said Lettuce. "It seems so uninteresting." She moved towards the Fiat. The author... Kitty cat's outside being loud. There's two strays out there. "Not in the least," I said, "but she likes to be thought so." "Well, I'm off to question the maids now. One cannot really like Slack, but we can admire his energy. We parted company, and I inquired of Reeves if he could see Mrs. Prothero. "She's lying down, sir, at the moment. Then I'd better not disturb her." "Perhaps, if you would wait, sir. I know Mrs. Prothero is anxious to see you. She was saying as much at luncheon." He showed me into the drawing room, switching on the electric light since the blinds were down. "A very sad business, all this," I said. "Yes, sir." His voice was cold and respectful. I looked at him. What feelings were at work under that impassive demeanor? Were there things that he knew and could have told us? "There's nothing so inhuman as the mask of the good servant. Is there anything more, sir? Was there... Is there any more? Is there any more, sir? Was there just a hint of anxiety to be gone behind that correct expression? There's nothing more, I said. I had a very short time to wait before Ann Prothero came to me. We discussed and settled a few arrangements, and then, what a wonderfully kind man Dr. Haydock is, she exclaimed. Haydock's the best fellow I know. He's been amazingly kind to me, but he looks very sad, doesn't he? It had much occurred to me to think of Haydock as sad. It had never. You hear the cat? Never occurred to me. I turned the idea over in my mind. I don't think I've ever noticed it, I said at last. I never have until today. One's own troubles sharpened one's eyes sometimes, I said. That's very true. She paused and then said, Mr. Clement, there's one thing I absolutely cannot make out. If my husband were shot immediately after I left him, how was it that I didn't hear the shot? They have reason to... there's a fight. They have reason to believe that the shot was fired later, but the 620 on the note was possibly added by a different hand, the murderer's. Her cheek paled. It didn't strike. You had the date. Let's see, it didn't strike. It didn't strike you that the date was not in his handwriting? How horrible. None of it looked like his handwriting. There was some truth in this observation. It was somewhat a legible scrawl and not so precise as Prothero's writing usually was. You're not sure they didn't still suspect Lawrence? I think he's definitely cleared. But Mr. Clement, who can it be? Lucius was not popular, I know, but I don't think he had any real enemies. Not that kind of enemy. I shook my head. It's a mystery. I thought wonderingly of Miss Marple's 7 suspects. Who could they be? After I took leave of Anne, I proceeded to put a certain plan of mine into action. I returned from Old Hall by way of the private path. When I reached the stile, I retraced my steps, and choosing a place where I fancied the undergrowth showed signs of being disturbed, I turned around for the path and forced my way back through the bushes. The wood was a thick one with a good deal of tangled undergrowth undergrowth. My progress was not very fast, and I suddenly became aware that someone else was moving amongst the bushes not very far from me. As I paused irresolutely, Lawrence Redding came into sight. He was carrying a large stone. I suppose I must have looked surprised, for he suddenly burst out laughing. No, he said, it's not a clue, it's a peace offering. A peace offering? Well, a basis for negotiations, shall we say. I want an excuse for calling on your neighbor, Miss Marple, and I have been told there is nothing she likes so much as a nice bit of rock or stone for the Japanese garden she makes. Quite true, I said. But what do you want to wish the old lady? Just this. If there was anything to be seen or heard yesterday, Miss Marple saw it. I don't mean anything necessarily connected with the crime, that she would think connected on the crime. Okay. I mean, come become something outre or a bizarre incident, some simple little happening that might give us a clue to the truth. Something that she wouldn't think worthwhile mentioning to the police. It's possible, I suppose. It's worth trying anyhow, Clement. I'm going to get to the bottom of this business for Ann's sake, if nobody else's, and I haven't any too much confidence in Slack. He's a zealous fellow, but zeal can't really take the place of brains. I see, I said, that you are that favorite character of fiction, the amateur detective. I don't know what they really hold their own that they really hold their own with the professional in real life. He looked at me shrewdly and suddenly laughed. What are you doing in the wood? What are you doing in the wood, Padre? I had the grace to blush. Just the same as I'm doing. I dare swear we've got the same idea, haven't we? How did the murderer come to the study? First way, along the lane and through the gate. Second way, by the front door. Third, wait a minute. Doggone it, I lost a spot. Third way. Is there a third way? My idea was to see if there was any sign of the bushes being disturbed or broken anywhere near the wall of the Vicarage garden. Did you hear that? I need to go break up the cat fight. Need to get something to drink, too. Can't believe I get in here without something to drink. That was just my idea, I admitted. I really got down to the job, though, continued Lawrence, because it occurred to me that I'd like to see Miss Marple first to make quite sure that no one did pass along the lane yesterday evening while we were in the studio. I shook my head. She was quite positive that nobody did. Yes, nobody whom she would call anybody. Sounds mad, but you see what I mean. But there might have been someone like a postman or milkman or a butcher's boy, someone whose presence would be so natural you wouldn't think of mentioning it. You've been reading G.K. Chesterton, I said. And Lawrence did not deny it. But don't you think there's just possibly something in the idea? Well, I suppose there might be, I admitted. Without further ado, we made our way to Miss Marple's. She was working in the garden and stalked out. And wait a minute. Working in the garden and called out to us as we climbed over the stile. You see, murmured Lawrence, she sees everybody. She received us very graciously and was much pleased with Lawrence's immense rock, which he presented with all due solemnity. It's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Redding, very thoughtful indeed. Emboldened by this, Lawrence embarked on his questions. Miss Marple listened attentively. Yes, I see what you mean, and I quite agree. It is the sort of thing no one mentions or bothers to mention. But I can assure you that there were... I can assure you... How can I get lost so easy? That there was nothing of the kind, nothing whatever. You're sure, Miss Marple? Quite sure. Did you see anyone go by the path into the wood that afternoon, I asked, or come from it? Oh, yes, quite a number of people. Dr. Stone and Miss Cram went that way. It's the nearest way to the barrow for them. That was a little after 2 o'clock, and Dr. Stone returned that way, as you know, Mr. Redding, since he joined you and Miss Prothero. By the way, I said, that shot, the one you heard, Miss Marple, Mr. Redding and Mrs. Prothero must have heard it too. I looked inquiringly at Lawrence. Yes, he said, frowning, I believe I did hear some shots. Weren't there one or two shots? I only heard one, said Miss Marple. It's only the vaguest impression in my mind, said Lawrence. Curse it all. I wish I could remember. If only I'd known. You see, I was so completely taken up with. He paused, embarrassed. I gave a tactful cough. Miss Marple, with a touch of prudishness, changed the subject. Inspector Slack has been trying to get me to say whether I heard the shot after Mr. Reddy and Miss Prothero had left the studio or before. I've had to confess that I really could not say definitely, but I have the impression, which is growing stronger the more I think about it, that it was after. Then that lets the let's see, think about it, that it was after. Then that lets the celebrated Dr. Stone out anyway, said Lawrence with a sigh. Not that there have ever been the slightest reason why he should be suspected of shooting poor old Prothero. Ah, said Miss Marple, but I always find it prudent to suspect everybody just a trifle. What I say is, you really never know, do you? This will help my dry mouth. Love these. These are the only M&Ms I really like. Besides the peanut ones. Break time. That was typical of Miss Marple. I asked Lawrence if he agreed with her about the shot. I really can't say. You see, it was such an ordinary sound. I should be inclined to think it had been fired when we were in the studio. The sound would have deadened, and one would have not noticed it less there. For other reasons than the sound being deadened, I thought to myself. I must ask Anne, said Lawrence. She may remember. By the way, there seems to be one curious fact that needs explanation. Miss Lestrange, the family lady of St. Mary Mead, the mystery lady of... Oh, I just said that. Paid a visit to old Prothero after dinner on Wednesday night, and nobody seems to have any idea what it was about. Old Prothero said nothing to either his wife or Lettuce. I still like Lettice better. Perhaps the vicar knows, said Miss Marple. Now, how did the woman know that I had been to visit Mrs. Lestrange that afternoon? That way she considers... the way she can... no, the way she always knows things is uncanny. I shook my head and said I could throw no light upon the matter. What does Inspector Slack think? Asked Miss Marple. He's done his best to bully the butler, but apparently the butler wasn't curious enough to listen at the door, so there it is. A man knows. I expect someone overheard something, though, don't you? Said Miss Marple. I mean, somebody always does. I think that is where Mr. Redding may have found out something. But Mrs. Prothero knows nothing. I didn't mean Anne Prothero, said Miss Marple. I meant the women servants. They do so hate telling anyone telling anything to the police, but a nice-looking young man, you'll excuse me, Mr. Redding, and one who has been unjustly suspected. Oh, I'm sure they'd tell him at once. I'll go and have a try this evening, said Lawrence with vigor. Thanks for the hint, Miss Marple. I'll go after a little job the vicar and I are going to do. It occurred to me that we had better get, no, get out of the way. Come on. It occurred to me we had better be getting on with it. I said goodbye to Miss Marple and we entered the woods once more. First we went up the path till we came to a new spot where it certainly looked as though someone had just left the path on the right-hand side. Lawrence explained that he had already followed this particular trail and found it led nowhere, but he added that we might as well try again. He might have been wrong. It was, however, as he had said, after about 10 or 12 yards, any signs of broken and trampled leaves petered out. It was from this spot that Lawrence had broken back towards the path to meet me earlier in the afternoon. We emerged on the path again and walked a little farther along. Again we came to a place where the bushes seemed disturbed. The signs were very slight, but, I thought, unmistakable. This time the trail was more promising. By a devious course, it wound steadily nearer to the vicarage. Presently we arrived out where the bushes grew thickly up to the wall. The wall is so high. The wall is so high. Wish I was. Kidding, sort of. Oh, doggone it. Sounds very slight. Randomized presently right. The wall is a high one and ornamented with fragments of broken bottles on the top. If anyone had placed a ladder against it, we ought to find traces of their passage. We were working our way slowly along the wall when a sound came to our ears of a breaking twig. I pressed forward, forcing my weight through a thick tangle of shrubs, and came face to face with Inspector Slack. So it's you, he said, and Mr. Redding. Now what do you think you two gentlemen are doing? Slightly crestfallen, we explained. Quite so, said the inspector, not being the fools we're usually thought to be. I had the same idea myself. I've been here over an hour. Would you like to know something? Yes, I said meekly. Whatever murdered Colonel Prothero didn't come this way to do it. There's not a sign either. There's not a sign. There's not a sign either on this side of the wall nor the other. Whoever murdered Colonel Prothero came through the front door. There's no other way he could have come. Impossible, I cried. Why impossible? Your door stands open. Anyone's only got to walk in. They can't be seen from the kitchen. They can't be seen from the kitchen. They know you're safely out of the way. They know Mrs. Clemens is in London. They know Mr. Dennis is at the tennis party. simply as ABC, and they don't need to go or come through the village. Just opposite the vicarage gate is a public footpath, and from it you can turn into those same woods and come out whichever way you choose. Unless Mrs. Price Ridley were to come out of her front gate at that particular minute. It's all clear sailing. A great deal more so than climbing over walls. The side windows of the upper story of Mrs. Price Ridley's house do overlook most of that wall. No, depend upon it, that's the way it came. It really seemed as though he must be right. And that's it. Thank God I'm falling asleep. Oh, Lord, I hope that made sense. It really seemed as though he must be right. I'm going to have to go back and make sure it makes sense. Okay, good Lord willing, we'll be on 17 tomorrow. Or did I just go to sleep? I love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. We'll read 17 tomorrow, I hope. I think I already said that.